Welcome back everyone to another video on the Vixen Victory channel. Today we're going to be talking about Chevreuse, and the reason why we're going to be starting with the 4 stars on the banner is because I might possibly be getting a Chloron in the future, so we might be actually looking at a build once I have the character and I can do a little bit more testing besides just in the trial for the character. But let's go ahead and talk about Chevreuse as a character, looking first and foremost at her talents, her level up materials, what you should actually kind of focusing on in terms of leveling priority. And as you can see here, like with most of the characters I already have built, you can already see that the normal attack talent or whatever talent is basically useless, I keep at level 1. And here with Chevreuse, the normal attack talent is practically useless. And the reason why is because she uses her skill and her burst, mainly not necessarily, her burst is mainly for damage, but her skill is really where a lot of things start to come together for her as a character. And mainly where she's focused into, even though she is a Pyro character, is focusing only in those overload teams. Now yes, she technically can be thrown into other teams, but we're going to see throughout the rest of her kit why she's specifically focused on staying on those overload teams, and why when you see other people talk about Chevreuse, why she's actually not put on anything besides overload teams. Once again, normal attack talent, keep at level 1, it's practically useless, not really something that you really want to focus into. If you have extra materials and you don't think that you're going to build any other Fontaine character in the future, you can go ahead and, use up your materials if you so desire, but personally I just keep them for future characters. Now, looking at her skill though, and her burst, once again, those are keeping at the similar level priority. Usually the skill is probably going to be a little bit higher, just because of the healing that you're going to get through leveling is going to get higher. Yes, your damage is going to be higher as well, but you really don't care too much about that. Really what you care about is the amount of healing she can give. Also, if you're going to level into the burst, you can. I would just keep it on same and par with the skill, just because the damage that comes out of her burst is actually pretty good. And if you go for a semi-support and damage route on Chevreuse, which can work and does work, you can actually get some pretty good damage out on the field, basically, while also going pretty heavily into your supportive capabilities. Now, looking at her skill and how it actually works, basically Chevreuse is going to use her gun and use her initial just kind of hit and immediately hit an enemy. Now, at the same time when she does that, for a short duration afterwards, she's going to continuously restore HP to the active character that's on the field, and the amount healed is based on her own max HP. As you can see here, when she does that, over time, she's going to get basically 4.2% of her max HP, 4.27% plus 482, this is at level 8. She's going to get this intermittently over a period of time, and that period of time is going to be 12 seconds. So that's kind of the idea initially with her skill used first and foremost. If you have an overcharged ball, she will then fire the overcharged ball instead of her regular skill hit, which also keep in mind the only way to trigger the overcharged ball is to use the hold mode, not the tap mode, considering we have 2 different modes. Those are going to look a little different here. You can see with the tap version, it's just an initial shot, little shot over there. Yes, you have the Numa aligned to it as well, and that's kind of initially how the tap skill works. Looking first and foremost at the hold version, you can kind of aim and push in different directions by holding the skill and then letting go, and you'll immediately do so. Now you kind of saw some little explosions on the sides as well as the main hit that it actually does, and that's kind of initially how her skill works. So you can have an overcharged ball. This will do a bigger pyro damage hit that'll hit a larger AoE area as well. So the regular hit damage is going to be the press version right here at 184%. The hold damage is going to do this initial hit, and the overcharged ball damage is going to do 451. So a lot heavier of a damage hit. The 46% surging blade is that, like, I believe it's Usia, not Numa. Usia damage hit that's coming afterwards. Now, Chevreuse gains 1 overcharged ball every time a nearby character in the party triggers an overloaded reaction, and can have up to 1 overcharged ball at a single time. So inside the skill, you can see that, okay, well, I can use my hold version even without an overcharged ball, but if you do have the hold version up and you have an overcharged ball ready, you will use that instead. Now, the reason why the overcharged ball comes into play is not necessarily because it does a huge damage hit, although that is nice, and yes, the healing is great from Chevreuse as a character, as being a nice support for some extra healing, but honestly, your healing isn't really that much to really speak of anyways. Really what it comes down to is actually the first passive talent, as well as the second passive talent. Let's go ahead and look at the burst though first, kind of just very quickly go over it. Just a huge damage hit that you're going to do, an AoE pyro damage hit that's going to have a bunch of little explosive shells that are going to do multiple hits afterwards as well. So the initial damage hit's going to be this huge damage hit that she's going to use, and that's going to really be nice and helpful for obviously damage purposes. And then secondary explosive shell damage, each of those is going to do damage as well, and they kind of like scatter into different areas, once again making it a larger hit to hit multiple enemies. This could set up for multiple different things. Really, it's mainly just for a nice big damage hit, which is why people like to tend to go for both of a either fully support route to just make sure she can buff the best way possible, or she's going for the other route of kind of a support and for a damage route. Now, going back to the second passive talent, we'll jump back to the first in a second. The second passive talent states that after Chevreuse fires an overcharged ball using her skill, nearby Pyro and Electro characters in the party gain 1% increased attack for every 1000 max HP Chevreuse has for 30 seconds. And you can have a max of 40%, meaning Chevreuse can have, to get the maximum buff, 40,000 max HP to then give 40% attack to other characters. Now, for a lot of other Pyro characters, this is a really good buff, and considering that she is already a Pyro character in and of itself, that is also giving a resonance on top of it for another 25% attack for the unfilled character. So although she is a nice healer and she does have some pretty good damage, one of her passive talent already gives a substantial attack increase. Now let's look at the second passive talent. When all party members basically are Pyro and Electro, and you have to have only Pyro and Electro. You can't have any other element in the party, and at least one of them. They can't be 4 Pyros or 4 Electros. You have to have both elements represented in the team, while at the same time making sure that no other element is in there. Chevreuse will then gain coordinated tactics to nearby party members. After a character triggers the overloaded reaction, the Pyro and Electro resistance of the opponents affected by this overloaded reaction will be decreased by 40% for 6 seconds. So we see a Pyro and Electro resistance decrease as well as a huge attack increase for only those Pyro and Electro characters. When you get an overcharged ball, right, all you need to do is get an overloaded reaction, right? So all you need to do necessarily to get one buff is the attack buff, right? So all you really need is 2 characters. You need a Pyro character and an Electro character. So let's say Chevreuse and Fischl. They team up together, and let's say there's an Alhaitham in the team. You can still technically get this buff because the overcharged ball is only coming from the overloaded reaction. It has no other stipulation from it. And therefore it's also gained based off of the attack increases based off of Chevreuse's own HP. So that's really it. It's kind of separated. The other passive though is going to be only Pyro and Electro characters. Having Pyro and Electro characters, yes, you can get the attack increase by just having the overload reaction happen. Overall though, looking at these 2 passives, only these characters are going to get this buff, because keep in mind this is Pyro and Electro characters. So yes, you can throw Alhaitham or Tighnari in the team. You can technically still get the attack buff, but the attack buff is only going to be given to, let's say if we put Alhaitham and Chevreuse and Fischl in a team, Alhaitham's a Dendro character, so he's not a Pyro or an Electro character. Pretty plain and simple, which means that Chevreuse is only going to give that buff to herself as well as Fischl. Now, Fischl's going to be very happy about that considering she's getting a nice attack buff, but your main DPS isn't really helping that much. So once again, that's kind of the idea with the other parts of the kit. So another great instance is if you did a Chloron and a Chevreuse on the same team, you have your main damage dealer getting a buff, but let's say you throw Nahida in there. Well, Nahida's not getting that attack buff, and Nahida does some pretty good off-field damage, so this could be a waste of her potential capabilities. So it might just be useful to throw another off-field character in there besides Nahida to help out the team. For instance, characters like Yayamiko, Fischl, or Xiangling that are Electro characters and Pyro characters that can still get the attack buff. So although you don't need like only Pyro and Electro characters to get the attack buff, it still heavily supports the idea of only having Pyro and Electro characters, which then perfectly coincides with the first passive talent. Now, looking a little bit beyond this, let's talk about her weapons. Looking at her weapons, the way that I go is Favonius Lance. For most characters, Favonius Lance is probably one of the better weapons, and this is really for more that support route. The support route is definitely going to help this a little bit more, but I also think that besides Favonius Lance, although it is ER heavy, and honestly, you're going to need the amount of energy recharge just to really help out, because getting her burst back could be pretty helpful, yes, But honestly, that's really the only thing that you really need to go for. Besides HP, something like energy recharge could be extremely helpful, just to get your burst back consistently to really try to do some extra damage. So Favonius Lance is pretty strong for me, but it's not even really the energy recharge main stat. It's really honestly the ability in the weapon with the refinement, being able to create more elemental particles for herself or other characters. That's really where the Favonius weapons really shine, which is why a lot of times that you look at this, that even though Favonius Lance, once again, a low energy recharge, to energy cost for her burst is really 60, it's really not that high, considering especially she's getting thrown with multiple Electro characters, and you're getting more energy anyways from a resonance. It really doesn't really make much sense to really throw a bunch of ER on her, but if you really want to make sure that you're getting some Favonius Lance buffs and get all that other stuff, then technically this can be helpful. So although energy recharge isn't the best stat in the world to necessarily slap onto your only support Chevreuse, it still can be pretty helpful. If you are going for more of a damage route, something like Favonius Lance definitely could still be pretty helpful just because you want to get that burst back. But I'll have some other options for that weapon specifically later. Now, a better weapon than probably Favonius Lance that most people would probably argue for is going to be Dialogues of the Desert Sages. Now, this was an event weapon, and at R5, you're basically going to get a bunch of energy back when you already do some healing. Now, because Chevreuse does healing intermittently already over time with her skill, she's getting some energy anyways through this little help here. But it's really, once again, not actually, it's the reverse of the actual Favonius, where you don't care about the main stat, you care about the ability. Dialogues is basically the opposite. You actually mainly care about the main stat of HP percent, giving you a higher max HP, which is then giving you a higher buff from that passive talent we talked about. Once again, getting more HP, it means giving more attack to those Pyro and Electro characters on the team. So something like Dialogues of the Desert Sages is extremely helpful for that. Besides that, yes, you can use some other weapons that would necessarily be helpful. For instance, you could then kind of look at another weapon like Black Tassel, that is an HP percent 3-star weapon, and that weapon is probably a little bit stronger just because of its capabilities of, once again, main stat of only caring about the bunch of HP percent you get. You don't really care about the damage against slimes, obviously, unless you're only fighting slimes with your Chevreuse, which I highly doubt. Now, looking a little bit further beyond that, kind of the support route of looking at her weapons, yes, there are things like Rightful Reward, which is another HP percent weapon that you could use, and if Chevreuse is healed, then she'll get some energy back. That's how that weapon works. So Rightful Reward is also a pretty good weapon I just want to throw in there that can be used. Outside of that, though, let's talk about the damage weapons. The first weapon option is going to be Engulfing Lightning. The reason why is because you're getting more attack based on the energy recharge that you have. Once again, like I talked about, what you care about with her damage and support version of her is getting a bunch of energy so that you can do this big damage hit here in her burst. Now, doing a lot of damage is great and all, but once again, you need that energy to actually make it work. So getting a good amount of energy recharge is going to be helpful. Getting more energy recharge, once again, is going to help with more damage, which is then going to help more with her as a character. Also making sure that she has a good amount of HP still at the same time to make sure that she can kind of balance being a support as well as a damage dealer. So something like Engulfing Lightning, although it gives an attack buff based on energy recharge, that is still extremely helpful considering the fact that, once again, if we go back to the burst here, the skill attributes, this is based off of attack anyways. So having some extra attack to do some extra damage is definitely going to be helpful in the long run. Outside of this weapon, obviously, right behind Engulfing Lightning, if a character really likes Engulfing Lightning, a weapon right behind that is going to be the Catch. The Catch is an extremely good weapon, especially since it's a free-to-play weapon and can be gotten through just fishing and Inazuma. Definitely a very solid weapon and can be great, especially giving you a higher damage hit as well as possibly getting more crit. It is a main stat of energy recharge to make sure that you are getting that higher amount of energy recharge to get your burst back consistently for every rotation. Outside of that, you could definitely do something stat sticky like Staff of Homa. Every character likes it, as well as Chevreuse really here, considering she can make a lot of actual use out of the ability. She gets an attack buff based on her HP, plus all the crit that she can really get. So all the crit damage plus the attack buff based on your HP means you can go full force even more into HP like you normally would with a support version of her, and kind of let this over here take care of the amount of attack that you would need for her damage in her actual burst. So if you have an extra staff lying around, you could definitely take this and throw it on your Chevreuse and make her from a just regular support to a support and a very nice damage dealer for the team. There are definitely other weapons you could use that are stat sticking, things like Staff of the Scarlet Sands, Luminous Elegy, Calamity Queller. There's plenty of other 5-star weapons that are really just stat sticks that I'm not really going to go through just because it would really be too much. If you're looking for other 4-stars, I know that Deathmatch has worked extremely well for a lot of people, getting a lot of extra crit rate, also increasing your attack. Once again, you're mainly caring about her being a damage dealer on top of actually everything else, so that's very, very good. Battle of the Fjords, another battle pass weapon that can be pretty helpful for you. So that's at least kind of the very initial way to kind of help out. And remember, keep in mind, Favonius Lance still can be a very budget option if you want to use this for her damage version. If you really want, though, a budget option, honestly, I would just say to throw on the catch on her. Now let's go ahead and talk about artifacts. Artifacts are a little bit interesting. And the reason why is because a lot of people are going to be using the set that I use, which is the Song of Days Past. The issue with the Song of Days Past is that I don't think a lot of people really grind this domain very much, or if they did, they kind of just got it for Chevreuse and maybe 1 or 2 other characters, and that's practically it, which is totally fine, which is why things like Noblesse Oblige also exist. But let's actually talk about this specific set. Looking at the Song of Days Past 4-piece, let's go over here, you're going to increase your healing bonus by 15%, obviously helping healing. Even if you have another healer in the team, can still be pretty helpful. The 4-piece states that when the equipping character heals a party member, the yearning effect will be created for 6 seconds. During the amount of time of that 6 seconds, the amount of healing you do is then going to be turned into a damage buff for the active party member. So after the 6 seconds ends, it's then going to turn into the Waves of Days Past effect, which then turns into when your active character hits an opponent with basically anything, the damage they do isn't going to be increased by 8% of the total healing amount recorded by the yearning effect. So the amount of healing that you do in that 6 seconds when you start healing is then going to turn into damage for the on-field character or for the active character, whether that be Chevreuse or another character. So that still can be pretty helpful for her, and even your damage-dealing Chevreuses are still going to like this set as well. Maybe not be perfect, but it would be pretty good still either way. If you really care about her being a support, though, this is the set to really go for. Now, that's another great thing about Chevreuse, is that besides the Song of Days Past set, Noblesse Oblige is another set that you can use, which is also good for the support and the damage version of her. The 2-piece increases elemental burst damage, which even if you're not going for damage, is still pretty nice because that modifier is so high. The 4-piece then states that using an elemental burst increases all party members' attack by 20% for 12 seconds. Keep in mind, usually with Chevreuse though, you're usually pairing her with Bennett, and Bennett is practically glued to this set. Just like at the bottom here, it says that this effect cannot stack, which means that if Bennett's using a 4-piece Noblesse and your Chevreuse is using a 4-piece Noblesse, then you're basically not going to be using the 4-piece Noblesse on your Chevreuse, or it's at least basically a 4-piece that's going to waste. So really, at the end of the day, yes, you can use the 4-piece Noblesse, I just don't really think it's a fantastic idea. Now, I do know it's extremely good and it can be very beneficial, but that's at least my personal idea with that set specifically. Now, another set you could use is Ocean Hued Clam. Ocean Hued Clam also gives a healing bonus in the 2-piece, and then the 4-piece states that when the character equipped in this artifact set heals a character in the party, a sea-dyed foam will appear for 3 seconds, accumulating the amount of HP recovered from healing. Basically the same thing that you're getting from the other 4-piece set. The amount of healing that you do within 3 seconds of healing a character is then going to turn into basically a physical damage hit that does a nice big damage hit just instantaneously. It's not helping the on-field character, it's not helping anything, it is just a huge damage hit that can possibly happen. Once again, could be a helpful set if you really just want her as a support or possibly for damage. I wouldn't really say this is the way to go for damage, but it could be helpful. And yes, also another idea for the 4-piece of a kind of damage set character for Chevreuse, you could try to do some sort of 4-piece of emblem just to try to make it work for the energy recharge, plus energy or elemental or energy recharge then turning into burst damage increase. That could be definitely helpful for you as a character if you're going for that damage specific set. Now, if you're kind of just getting ready for any of these 4-piece sets, once again, Song of Days Past being the best 4-piece set you can really give her, You could technically just get away with doing a Tenacity of the Millith or a Vorakash's Glow 2-piece, kind of combining these, maybe even combining them with a 2-piece of Energy Recharge here if you really want. That's just kind of up to you, or maybe a 2-piece of Noblesse. That's just kind of up to you on what you really want to combine. But once again, don't really sit and be okay with that. She is a character that definitely works on double HP or HP and ER or HP and elemental burst damage. But I do think that the 4-piece Song of Days passage is going to be better for you in the long run. Looking at main stats, if you're going for a support build, double HP, possibly even triple HP is going to be very good for you. The reason that I go crit rate here is purely because I have Favonius Lance, and like all Favonius users, they really want a lot of crit rate to create those particles for that ability to be actually useful, which means that I need a crit rate circlet. So if you're running Favonius, you're going to run a crit rate circlet. If you're using any of those other support weapons that I talked about, like Dialogues or Rifle Steward or something like that, then you're going to go for an HP percent circlet as well as these other two as HP percent. Now, if you're going for a damage route, Chevreuse, depending on what weapon you have, it could technically kind of change what you actually want to do. So in all reality, what you would really want to do is go for an attack percent sans, and then on the goblet you would want to go for either some sort of like probably a pyro damage bonus, and then a crit rate or crit damage circlet, just kind of balance out your crit. It's going to be kind of difficult probably to kind of balance that crit out, but that's kind of up to you. The reason why I say that the attack percent sans might just be different, there's two different things that you can do here. Instead of going for an HP percent sans, or an attack percent, sorry, you can go HP percent if you have something like Staff of Homa, because you're turning the HP into attack. Also alongside of that, you could technically also, if you really want to, throw this into an energy recharge main stat. And that's just, once again, if you really care about getting a bunch of energy and you're really low on energy and you have enough HP somewhere else, then technically this could be helpful for you as well. Or if you have enough attack from some other place, like a 5-star weapon, then you could probably be okay with running an energy recharge sans. But I still do think that the attack percent sans works the best. And if you have Staff of Homa, you can try to test whether or not a kind of this idea of whether or not you need the HP percent sans to really make this worth it or make it better overall for her as a character. Now, you still want to focus with her main build with focusing on as a support. You still want to focus on HP and ER and possibly even crit rate if you have her as a character for crit rate. Try to get as close as possible. If you're going for the healing and for the buffing route, try to get as close to that 40,000 threshold for her as a character. Yes, you want to get a pretty good amount of crit rate. I always like to try to hit 60 or above, and I barely squeaked by here. And then energy recharge, you want to make sure that you're trying to get a good amount of energy recharge where you don't have to worry about her getting her burst all the time. Once again, it's just nice and helpful outside of the HP and the crit rate. So if you've met your HP and crit rate goals, then kind of go for some energy recharge and see if you can kind of make it go somewhere and be helpful to at least make sure you're getting some bursts out, which is also helping with some extra damage. Now let's go ahead and talk about her constellations. Her constellations definitely spike up, and everybody really looks forward to that C6. So if you are pulling, she's probably one of the very few characters that I would say it's probably okay to try to just chase after the C6 as a 4-star. You're definitely going to probably hit a 5-star before you do that, unless the game just really likes you and doesn't like me, but it could definitely happen. But let's go ahead and talk about the constellations. Looking at her first constellation, it states that when the active character with coordinated tactics status, not Chevreuse herself, triggers the overloaded reaction, they will recover 6 energy. Now, coordinated tactics, once again, let's go back over here. Coordinated tactics means that Chevreuse grants coordinated tactics when the entire party is Pyro and Electro. So no other element in the party. And it has to be those two elements. It can't be only Pyro or only Electro. They're going to have this no matter what, and then if they trigger the overload reaction, they will recover 6 energy. This effect will trigger once every 10 seconds, so it's kind of helpful for those other characters to get some energy back, especially if they are energy hungry. Definitely helpful. Looking at the C2, it states that after holding the skill and hitting a target, 2 chain explosions will be triggered near the location where the said target is hit. Each explosion deals pyro damage equal to 120% of Chevreuse's attack, and this effect can be triggered up to once every 10 seconds, and it is considered skill damage. So any buffs towards bursts and whatnot will not buff this. So it is kind of nice to see that you get some extra damage hits, and once again we're starting to see her be a little bit more of a damage buff overall through as a character. She does have some supportive capabilities, but at the same time she still likes to do a lot of damage. Looking at the C3, it increases the level of the skill, and the C5 increases the level of the burst. The C4 states that after using the burst, the hold mode of the skill will not go on cooldown when Chevreuse uses it. That means that when she immediately uses her skill after using her burst, she can technically just use her skill again pretty soon afterwards. This effect is removed after the skill has been fired twice or using the hold version or after 6 seconds. Really what this allows you to do is just do some extra damage. It's not really allowing that buff to go, double on or do anything extra long because the buff's too short. This buff does go on for 6 seconds, so what you technically could try to do is create the overloaded reaction and try to kind of get this extra buff, and that could be very helpful, but keep in mind that the second passive talent goes on for 30 seconds, and this little buff here, it's an overload reaction. If you're having Pyro and Electro characters creating the overload reaction over and over again, this isn't really never going to run out. So the C4 is really actually just a help to get some extra damage out, and yes, to throw out an extra overcharged ball, but once again, we've already kind of thrown together that overcharged ball is just a damage hit at that point because the passive talent goes on for 30 seconds for that attack buff. So yes, it can be helpful, it's probably just not extremely necessary. Looking at the C6, everybody's favorite part of Chevreuse, after 12 seconds of the healing effect from the skill, all nearby party members recover HP equivalent to 10% of Chevreuse's max HP one time. In my personal opinion, that's pretty good, but that's not even what people focus on, which is totally fair because the next part is extremely good. After a party member is healed by the skill, they gain a 20% pyro damage bonus and an electro damage bonus for 8 seconds with a max of 3 stacks, meaning 3 times of healing means 60% pyro damage bonus and 60% electro damage bonus. And those stacks are counted independently, so if she heals more than that, the 8 seconds is just constantly getting refreshed until she's done healing. So you're seeing all of that happen. You're getting a very long buff and a very good buff through her C6, which is why everybody chases after her for that C6. Now let's go ahead and talk about some teams. Now, in a very basic sense, every single Pyro and Electro character is gonna really like to be on this team. Any team with Chevreuse, they're gonna be happy. If you look at a character like Arlecchino, she works really well with her as a character. The major way of how I'm going to do this is I'm just going to show you what a normal regular team is going to look like. So I'll throw in a 4-star version of Yayamiko, and we'll throw in Chevreuse, and we'll throw in Bennett. Once again, another reason why you're going to see Bennett in a lot of the teams that Chevreuse is in, because of his nice attack buff, which is also why Chevreuse usually gets thrown on one of those other sets, not Noblesse Oblige, because once again, those effects do not stack. So, throwing these few characters together, having the off-field Electro, you really don't care about the off-field Electro too much, because yes, Fischl, Yayamiko, even if you're using an Electro on-fielder and you're throwing Xiangling, which I'll show in a second, yes, they are getting the attack buff. It's very helpful. But what you really care about, you're caring about the Arlecchino getting that damage buff. And that attack buff is very, very helpful for them. So characters like Fischl and whatnot, yes, are very helpful, but you want somebody who's going to do a lot of off-field application. As Chevreuse and Bennett are doing no off-field application, obviously, especially for Pyro, Arlecchino is doing Pyro attacks all day, every day on field. You need someone to constantly be triggering the overloaded reaction while they're off-field. Also, once again, when we get into Constellations, that's also helping Chevreuse give energy back to characters like that, which is also helping them. When we're looking at Electro main DPSs, once again, this is going to be kind of the idea with these 4 is kind of the idea with any Pyro DPS. So swap out any character and throw them in there, and that's really how this is going to look. The upgraded version, in my personal opinion, is going to be throwing Yayamiko in there because she does do more damage, especially in this team, which tends to be a better option, and I just like Yayamiko more. But besides this, we're looking at another team that you could do, which is looking at a different little bit of a run here, which is throwing in Raiden with Kujosara, Chevreuse, and Bennett. Now, you could easily run without a Kujosara and do a Xiangling, do a Fischl, do a Yayamiko. You could put plenty of other people here, but I have a C6 Kujosara, and my Raiden really, really likes that. So C6 Kujosara with Raiden, Chevreuse, and Bennett, you're getting some really, really nice buffs from Kujosara, some really, really nice buffs from Chevreuse, and some really, really nice buffs for Bennett to make Raiden Shogun, make sure that people don't forget her just because she's an unassuming character. So this team works extremely well, and before Arlecchino and before all these other crazy DPSs I have now, this team definitely still cleared things that it probably shouldn't have. Things that probably weren't necessarily made to go against Overload, these teams still cleared. So I definitely think this is a very, very strong team. Chloron works exceptionally well in this position as well, and even if you take out a character like Kujosara and throw in another character, I'm just going to pretend that my Lisa is a Chloron here. Hopefully I'll get Chloron in the future. You could easily throw in a different character, which I am obviously normally not a fan of, but you could definitely throw in a character like Xiangling here. Throwing in Xiangling, throwing in any other character that you can really think of, but keep in mind you're not going to throw in any Viridescent users, a character like Shilonen, because it's going to mess up that resistance shred that Chevreuse gives for all the characters. All characters have to be Pyro and Electro, as well as they have to make sure that they are only Pyro and Electro, no other element. So you still have to have one Electro or at least one Pyro, but they all have to be only those two elements. Outside of this, there's plenty of other teams that Chevreuse can really work with. Once again, characters like Yoimiya, which probably is not going to be that great just because the knockback is really going to hurt her, but characters like Arlecchino really, really like this. Characters like Hu Tao, which, once again, knockback could definitely be a problem if you don't have C1 Hu Tao, but those characters I showed, Raiden and Arlecchino, I've seen kind of the best usability for. Outside of those characters, plenty of other Pyro DPSs and Electro DPSs work. Hopefully I can get Chloron in the future. I know she works really well on an Overload team, but Chevreuse is just an amazing buffer, and obviously so many people are happy whenever she can pop up back on a banner because they really want to make sure they're getting that C6. I'm making this a little bit later, so that's actually why this looks a little bit different, but the other thing I did want to talk about really quickly is that looking at Malwika and Chevreuse together, the major issue that we tend to see here is that the only other character that can actually really make this work is going to be someone like Auron, because you need a Pyro or an Electro character, once again, like we've been talking about, to try to make sure that you're getting every single buff out of Chevreuse. And once again, that just kind of comes into the issue that the major two characters that are helping a character like Malwika are not Pyro or Electro characters right now. One of the characters being Sitlali and the other being Shilonen, a Cryo and a Geo character. So right now it doesn't seem like we have amazing options to really make a pretty good Overload team, just because there's nobody to really make sure that Malwika consistently gets her ult back by consuming enough Night Soul points. Obviously this can be used, it's just not even going to be close to optimal because that burst is not going to come back on every rotation. Never mind, it's going to probably take possibly 2, maybe even 3 rotations to just have Malwika drain her own Night Soul points and therefore kind of get them that way, or just do enough normal attacks. So a little bit of an issue there and could be a hiccup. Hopefully in the future, characters like maybe Aoife or maybe just maybe different characters, Ikfa even, maybe being an Electro character, will be pretty good at possibly just getting rid of Night Soul points pretty quickly, and that'll allow her to be a really solid teammate with Malwika. But as of this moment, it doesn't seem like we actually have anybody that's actually going to make the Malwika and Chevreuse team right now specifically work, but hopefully in the future we will. Going to this idea really quick about 4-star DPSs, characters like Gaming and Yanfei can actually work pretty well when kind of making Chevreuse that support. I only really talked about the 5-star DPSs, but honestly, characters like Gaming and Yanfei are usually put on vaporized teams for, like, obviously Gaming for those plunge, melt, and vape teams. And Yanfei, because of her slow application, similar to what Gaming does, you're just kind of waiting and it's a lot easier to reapply that element. Chevreuse is actually still can be helpful though for these types of teams in Overload. Not necessarily going to break the bank or do anything crazy in the Abyss and go absolutely destroy 12-3, and if it does, let me know, that'd be pretty cool to see. But from what I've seen, usually these are just really, really cool, fun teams, and especially pretty fun and usable in a pinch when you're looking at something like the Imaginarium Theater. Before we get into looking at her outside of Overload teams, technically Chevreuse can be thrown as a DPS in these teams, and all you would really need once again is just throwing in a 4th character. That could be a Kuki, that could be a Kujosara for some reason, that could be a Beto for shielding, and throwing in a Bennett at the end of the day with the team, having double Electro, double Pyro, maybe because you want resonances. Maybe you're saying, honestly, I don't even know why you brought up Beto here. I'd rather have a character like, I don't know, Dory down there, or a different character, maybe Dia for, maybe a little bit of difference. Have Dia, you want to make her useful. Dia can also work in this slot for the main DPS. She's not necessarily a part of the 4-star team lineup, but she's a standard character, so she's also a little bit better as a support, but technically can still work as a support or the DPS of the team. Once again, any of these slots can be moved around. If you put Chevreuse as a DPS, this also can technically work. Just make sure that she's focusing full blown on that like full damage build. And even still, with a lot of the HP buffs that she can still give herself, I believe through her ascensions, she can still actually be a pretty solid healer still by using her skill and either help herself out or other teammates. Besides that, you could try to use her outside of any of those teams and just try to throw her in like a vaporized team, or throw her in, I don't know, a Burgeon team or something like that, or which wouldn't really make too much sense, but a melt team or something like that. You could definitely try to do plenty of other things with Chevreuse, but once again, you're not creating an overload at that point, most likely, and if you are, you're only getting one buff, which is the attack buff, and it's only helping her and the Electro character. It's not helping any other character of any other element. That also keeps in mind that you're getting rid of the 40% resistance shred to everyone, because that passive talent can't unlock because there's more other characters of other elements in the party. So at the end of the day, overload, she's basically just kind of stuck to. Well, that's everything I've got talking about Chevreuse. If you guys did like the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe. Let me know how you guys use your Chevreuse. I have a friend who does the deathmatch way and kind of goes a full support and goes for a damage route. His numbers are actually insane, and the buff is still pretty good based on his HP to give that buff to the other characters, so it definitely does help. I personally just like to go for the full support route. I really do like it, and the healing isn't really that bad actually at the end of the day either. But let me know how you guys use your Chevreuse, which way you guys go, or if you guys do anything different and new. Let me know if you guys are pulling on the current banner and trying to grab that C6. I'd love to hear about it. Thank you guys for watching the video though again, and I'll see you guys in the next one.